a body bursting with disease, a stench so putrid that courtiers fainted, a death so grotesque it was nearly erased from England's history books. This is the real, horrifying final chapter in the life of Henry VIII, the King, who once defied the Pope, shattered a church, and ruled England with divine arrogance. But in the end, he couldn't even rule his own body. Henry Tudor was born on June 28, 1491, the second son of Henry VII. When his older brother Arthur died unexpectedly, Henry was thrust into the role of heir. At 17, he ascended the throne, and early on he dazzled all of Europe. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders, red gold hair, and a regal bearing. Foreign ambassadors described him as the ideal prince, charming, athletic, eloquent, a Renaissance man through and through. But behind the poetry, music, and sportsmanship was a temperamental soul, prone to mood swings and increasingly obsessed with control. That obsession would come to define his reign and his death. In the early years of his rule, Henry was a robust symbol of vitality. He jousted, danced, hunted, and wrote love letters in Latin. But everything changed on January 24, 1536. During a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace, the king's horse tripped and fell, pinning Henry underneath its massive body. The king was unconscious for 2 hours. Many feared he wouldn't wake up. When he did, he was never the same. That accident left a deep wound in his right leg, a wound that refused to heal. It became a chronic ulcer, festering and oozing for the rest of his life. It emitted such a nauseating odor that some courtiers claimed they could smell the king before he even entered a room. Others fainted from the stench. Physicians tried everything. They lanced the wound. They applied poultices made of arsenic and vinegar. They cauterized it with red-hot irons. These treatments, primitive and brutal, only made things worse. The leg swelled. The tissue decayed. The pain became constant. At the same time, his mobility deteriorated. No longer able to exercise, the king gained enormous amounts of weight. Records show that his waist expanded to over 54 inches or 137 centimeters, and his weight surpassed 180 kilograms. He had to be moved with a system of pulleys and reinforced chairs. Palaces were retrofitted with wider doorways, just to accommodate his growing bulk. But the decay of his body mirrored the decay of his mind. After the accident, Henry became increasingly paranoid. Coincidentally or not, it was during this same year that he ordered the execution of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. She was charged with incest, adultery, and treason charges many historians now believe were fabricated. Some experts speculate that Henry suffered brain damage during his fall. The injury may have worsened existing tendencies toward impulsivity and aggression. His decisions grew more erratic, his rage more violent. Trusted advisors were suddenly sent to the scaffold. Friends vanished overnight. By his late 40s, Henry's health was in free fall. The ulcer on his leg grew worse by the day. The treatments grew more desperate. At times, his physicians applied mixtures that included gold, leaf, and mercury, hoping to draw out the rot. Other times, they used leeches, believing the king's bad humors needed balancing. His entire lower body became a battleground of infection. Gangrene crept in. His flesh blackened. Bones became visible through open sores. Servants were required to clean and redress the wounds daily, a job so horrific. Some requested transfers rather than endure the smell. Meanwhile, Henry continued to indulge in excess. His daily caloric intake reached absurd levels, 4,000 to 5,000 calories. Much of it red meat and sugary wine. Vegetables were almost non-existent in his diet. Constipation became a serious issue. He suffered from kidney stones, chronic gout, and possibly type 2 diabetes. Still, he married again twice. His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was only 19 when they wed. The marriage was a disaster. Unable to bear his smell and condition, she took a lover. When the affair was discovered, Henry had them both executed. His final wife, Catherine Parr, married him more out of obligation than love. She became more nurse than queen, overseeing his care. organizing his medications and managing his outbursts. By 1546, Henry was a shell of the man he once was. His teeth were blackened, his breath so foul that visitors brought handkerchiefs soaked in perfume. His legs oozed constantly. He could barely stand. He drifted in and out of fevered delusion, but no one dared say he was dying. In Tudor England, predicting the monarch's death was considered treason, so his doctors lied, his courtiers smiled, and the rot spread. He became obsessed with poisoning, demanding that all meals be tasted beforehand. Dishes were inspected, utensils polished and sealed. He trusted no one. He ordered the executions of trusted nobles, fearing imaginary plots. The Earl of Surrey, once a favored poet and courtier, was sent to the scaffold just days before the king himself expired. Even in his final moments, Henry clung to power with white knuckles, lashing out at shadows. On January 27, 1547, the end was near. Gangrene had consumed his leg. He was delirious, feverish, and bedridden. Finally, he allowed Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to be summoned. When asked if he died in the faith of Christ, Henry could not speak. He simply squeezed the Archbishop's hand. It was the last thing he ever did. He died in the early hours of January 28th, aged 55. But even in death, his torment was not over. The embalming process was rushed and crude. The body was too large for the coffin prepared. Internal organs were removed and replaced with herbs, but decomposition had already set in. His bloated body leaked fluids. During a night vigil at Sion Abbey, these fluids spilled from the coffin onto the floor. Chroniclers recorded a disturbing scene. Stray dogs entered the chapel and lapped up the royal discharge. It was viewed by some as divine judgment, the once godlike king, consumed by street animals. His funeral was delayed for nearly 3 weeks due to the logistics of moving his massive body. On February 16, 1547, he was finally buried at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, next to Jane Seymour, the only wife who had given him a male heir. Ironically, that heir, Edward VI, would die at just 15 years old. Henry's obsession with producing a male lineage ended in failure. His throne passed to his daughters, Mary the Fern, who tried to restore Catholicism and burned hundreds of Protestants, and Elizabeth the Fiend, the daughter of the wife Henry executed, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated monarchs in history. Henry's legacy is a contradiction: a man of vision who modernized England's government, a tyrant who killed those closest to him, a romantic who wrote poetry, a monster who mutilated his own body with indulgence and rage. Historian Alison Weir once wrote, "It is one of the great paradoxes of history that a man who began with so much promise, beauty, and ability ended as a grotesque caricature of himself." His death, painful, slow, humiliating, was more than a medical event. It was a symbol a king who once ruled as God's anointed, brought low by infection, disease, and the unavoidable decay of flesh. It is a reminder that even the most powerful rulers, no matter how divine they claim to be, are still made of blood, bone, and weakness. Henry the Eighth's death was not glorious. It was not peaceful. It was grotesque. And in that grotesque end lies the moral of his story. Power cannot preserve you, legacy cannot save you, and history never forgets how you died. Though monuments were raised and titles passed on, the last images of Henry VIII remain, not of a noble king seated on a throne, but of a sick man lying in agony, drenched in sweat, surrounded by servants too afraid to speak. His body, once praised for its strength, became a spectacle of decay, his legacy trapped in a rotting frame. In the end, the story of Henry VIII's death is not just a tale of disease. It's a cautionary epic of pride, punishment, and the unrelenting grip of mortality.